7 siblings vanished from Orphanage in 1993. Director's shocking confession 30 years later. I still remember the taste of stale coffee in that cramped newsroom. The morning of October 15th, 1993, changed everything. My editor tossed a manila folder across my desk. 7 children missing from St. Helena's Orphanage, he said with tired eyes. The folder felt heavier than it should have. Inside were 7 school photos, each child staring back with hopeful smiles. Maria, age 12, the oldest, with dark braids and serious eyes. Then came the twins, Carlos and Carmen, both 10 years old. Roberto was 9, always caught mid-laugh in every picture. Little Anna was 7, missing her front teeth. Diego, 6 years old, clutched a stuffed elephant in his photo. The youngest was Sophia, barely 4, with curls that caught sunlight. St. Helena's sat on the edge of our small town like a forgotten secret. The building had housed children since the 1940s. Cracked paint peeled from its walls, and the roof sagged under decades of rain. Most people drove past without a second glance, but these 7 children had called it home. They arrived together 3 years earlier after their parents died in a car accident. The Morales siblings, inseparable and fierce in their loyalty to each other. Director Margaret Finley ran the orphanage with an iron fist. She had worked there for 20 years, starting as a young teacher. The woman rarely smiled and spoke in clipped sentences. Her grey hair was always pulled back tight, and her clothes were pressed to perfection. The morning they disappeared, October 14th, started like any other. The children attended classes in the orphanage's makeshift school. They ate lunch together at their usual table. After afternoon chores, they played in the dusty courtyard. Evening came with its routine of dinner, homework, and bedtime prayers, but when morning arrived, their beds were empty. 7 children had vanished without a trace. The police arrived within hours of the discovery. They combed through every room, every closet, every hiding spot children might choose. They interviewed staff members, searched the grounds, and questioned neighbors. The investigation consumed our town for months. Margaret Finley answered every question with mechanical precision. The children were there at bedtime check, she insisted. She had personally counted heads and locked the front door. No windows were broken, no doors left open. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. If you believe every missing child deserves to be found, type hope below. Search parties formed immediately after the news broke. Volunteers walked through forests calling their names. Helicopters circled overhead for days, their blades cutting through autumn air. Dogs tracked scents that seemed to disappear at the orphanage gates. The FBI joined the investigation after the first week. Special agents in dark suits questioned everyone connected to St. Helena's. They dug through financial records, background checks, and employment histories. They installed phone taps and surveillance equipment. Still, nothing. Media attention followed quickly behind law enforcement. Television crews camped outside the orphanage gates. Reporters knocked on doors throughout our town, desperate for new angles. The story made national headlines for 3 weeks straight. I covered every development, every false lead, every heartbreak. The case consumed my days and haunted my nights. Those 7 faces stared back from my office wall, reminding me that somewhere, somehow, they were waiting to be found. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that covered any remaining evidence. The searches stopped when temperatures dropped below freezing. One by one, the news crews packed up and left. The FBI closed their field office and returned to the city. But the families who had hoped to adopt the Morales children never stopped asking questions. Letters arrived at my desk every few months. Phone calls came from investigators who had heard rumors or discovered new theories. The case became a cold file, but it never truly went cold in people's hearts. Margaret Finley continued running St. Helena's for 3 more years. She rarely spoke about the missing children, claiming the tragedy was too painful to discuss. When she finally retired in 1996, she moved to a small house across town. The orphanage closed permanently shortly after her departure. 27 years passed like pages turning in a book. I left journalism for a while, started a family, moved away from our small town. But the Morales children never left my thoughts completely. Their photos stayed in a box in my closet, waiting for the day when answers might finally come. That day arrived with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning. Margaret Finley wanted to see me, the voice on the phone explained. She was 80, 3 years old now, living in Sunset Manor nursing home. She had something important to tell me about the 7 children who disappeared. My hands trembled as I drove through familiar streets toward the nursing home. 30 years had passed since I last saw Margaret Finley. The woman I remembered was stern and imposing, always in control of every situation. What could she possibly want to tell me now? Sunset Manor smelled like disinfectant and fading flowers. Margaret sat in a wheelchair by her window, staring out at the parking lot. Age had softened her sharp edges, but her eyes still held that familiar intensity. Her grey hair had turned white, and her hands shook slightly when she gestured for me to sit down. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Her voice was different now, fragile and uncertain. She said she had been carrying a terrible secret for 30 years. The weight of it was crushing her, especially now that death felt close. She needed to tell someone the truth before it was too late. The children never left the orphanage that night, she whispered. They were still there when the police arrived the next morning. They had been there the entire time, hidden in a place no one thought to search. My mouth went dry as her words sank in. The rain outside tapped against the window, like fingers drumming. On a table, she continued speaking, her voice barely audible above the sound of my racing heart. There was a hidden room in the basement, she explained. It had been sealed off decades earlier when the heating system was updated. The entrance was behind a false wall in the storage room. She had discovered it years before the children disappeared and had used it to store old records and forgotten furniture. The night of October 14th had started normally, she said, but around 9 o'clock she heard arguing from the children's dormitory. Maria was upset about something, raising her voice at one of the younger children. Margaret went to investigate and found all 7 siblings huddled together, whispering about running away. If you believe truth always finds a way to surface, type justice below. They had heard rumors about being separated, Margaret explained. Someone had told them that prospective parents were coming to visit, but they might not want to adopt all 7 children together. The siblings were terrified of being split apart after losing everything else in their young lives. Margaret made a decision that would haunt her for 30 years. Instead of calming their fears or explaining the adoption process, she told them, she had a special place where they could hide until the danger passed. She led them down to the basement and showed them the hidden room. It was meant to be temporary, she insisted, just a few days until the social workers moved on to other cases. She brought them food, blankets, and books to keep them occupied. She promised they would be safe there, that no one would ever separate them. But something went wrong on the 3rd day. Margaret arrived with breakfast to find the hidden room empty. A ventilation grate had been removed from the wall, leading to an old air shaft that connected to the building's original foundation. The children had found another way out of their hiding place. She searched frantically through the basement tunnels and crawl spaces. The building was old, with maintenance areas and forgotten passages that had been sealed off over the decades. She found signs that the children had been there, footprints in the dust, candy wrappers left behind, but they had vanished into the building's hidden spaces. Margaret made another decision that sealed her fate and theirs. She called the police and reported the children missing from their beds. She convinced herself that they had somehow escaped the building entirely, that they were somewhere out in the world waiting to be rescued. The investigation began immediately, just as she had known it would. Police officers searched the dormitories, the classrooms, the kitchen, and the offices. They combed through the main basement area where the furnace and water heater stood. But they never found the hidden room behind the false wall. Margaret watched the searches continue for weeks, her guilt growing heavier with each passing day. She wanted to tell the truth, to show the investigators where the children had really been. But too much time had passed. Too many lies had been told. She convinced herself that revealing the hidden room would only make things worse. The children's voices haunted her sleep for months after the searches ended. She would wake in the middle of the night, certain she could hear them calling from somewhere deep in the building. During the day, she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shadows that seemed too small to be adults. She hired contractors to seal off the remaining basement passages after the FBI left. She told them she was concerned about structural integrity and energy efficiency. They filled the old ventilation shafts with concrete and installed new walls over questionable areas. The work took 3 weeks to complete. Margaret never returned to the basement after that. She delegated all storage duties to other staff members and avoided that part of the building entirely. When the orphanage finally closed, she made sure the basement was included in the demolition plans. "But the building was never torn down," she whispered. "Budget cuts and bureaucratic delays kept St. Helena's standing empty for years. Eventually, the city sold it to a developer who planned to convert it into apartments. The renovation work began last month. The construction crew discovered the hidden room on their second day of basement work. They found old furniture, dusty, records, and 7 small skeletons huddled together in what had once been their final hiding place. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my pen. The fluorescent lights in the nursing home buzzed overhead like angry wasps. Margaret continued her confession, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The medical examiner had already completed his preliminary investigation. The children had died from dehydration and exposure, probably within a week of disappearing. They had crawled deeper into the building's foundation, trying to find another way out. The passages they chose led to dead ends, spaces too small for adults to follow. They had left messages scratched into the walls, she said, simple words carved, with fingernails or small stones, names of family members they missed, promises to stay together always, a final plea for someone to find them and take them home. Margaret looked directly at me for the first time since beginning her confession. She said she had destroyed 7 innocent lives through her selfish decisions and cowardice. She had chosen her own reputation over their safety, her fear over their lives. She had let an entire town search in vain while she held the key to their location. The police were already on their way to arrest her, she explained. She had called them right before asking to see me. At 83 years old, she would likely die in prison, but at least she would die knowing the truth had finally been told. If you believe confession can bring peace to the departed, type "forgive" below. The weight of her words pressed against my chest like a physical force. 30 years of wondering, 30 years of hoping, and the answer had been there all along. 7 children had died alone in the dark while the world searched for them in the wrong places. I asked her why she decided to confess now, after all these years of silence. Margaret closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. She said she had been diagnosed with advanced cancer 3 months earlier. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe days, to live. She could not face whatever came next without releasing this terrible burden. She also mentioned the construction worker who found the room. He was a young man, probably in his 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. When he called the police, he stayed with the remains until help arrived. He spoke to them softly, she said, as if they could still hear him. He promised they would finally go home. That image broke something inside her that had held for 3 decades. She realized that even strangers were treating the children with more compassion than she had shown in their final moments. She had failed them as their caretaker, as an adult, as a human being. The police arrived while we were still talking. Two officers in dark uniforms, speaking in quiet tones, appropriate for a nursing home. They were respectful but firm as they explained her rights and placed handcuffs around her frail wrists. Margaret nodded at each statement, accepting her fate with the same mechanical precision I remembered from years before. As they wheeled her toward the door, she looked back at me one final time. She asked me to tell their story, to make sure people knew what really happened to the Morales children. She said they deserved to have their truth told, even if it came 30 years too late. The next few days passed in a blur of media attention and official statements. The discovery at St. Helena's made national news again, just as it had in 1993. This time, though, the story had an ending, even if it was not the one anyone had hoped to find. Margaret Finley died in the county jail infirmary 4 days after her arrest. The cancer had spread faster than anyone expected, and the stress of confession seemed to accelerate her decline. She passed away quietly in her sleep, without ever standing trial for her crimes. The Morales children were finally laid to rest in Greenwood Cemetery on a sunny morning in early spring. The entire town attended their funeral, along with hundreds of strangers who had followed their story. 7 small caskets sat side by side, just as the children would have wanted. People brought flowers, toys, and handwritten notes. A local artist had created a memorial sculpture showing 7 children holding hands, their faces turned toward the sky. The inscription read simply, "Together always, the Morales family." The foster families who had hoped to adopt them in 1993 attended the service. They were older now, with grown children of their own, but they still remembered the 7 faces they had hoped to welcome home. Many spoke about the lives that might have been, the birthdays and graduations, and weddings that would never happen. The FBI reopened their investigation briefly, but there was little left to examine. Margaret's confession matched the physical evidence perfectly. The case was officially closed with a finding of criminal negligence and involuntary manslaughter. The children's deaths were ruled accidental, the result of adult failures rather than malicious intent. St. Helena's Orphanage was demolished within 6 months of the discovery. The city decided that the building held too much tragedy to ever serve any positive purpose. A small park was built on the site, with playground equipment and walking paths. The memorial sculpture was moved there, surrounded by flowers that volunteers tend year-round. I returned to journalism full-time after Margaret's confession. The story of the Morales children became my obsession once again, but this time with a different purpose. Instead of searching for missing children, I was documenting their legacy and ensuring their story would never be forgotten. If you believe remembrance honors those we have lost, type "remember" below. The impact of their story rippled through our community and beyond. St. Helena's case became a catalyst for reform in the child welfare system. New regulations required multiple staff members to verify children's whereabouts during overnight counts. Background checks became more thorough, and psychological evaluations were added to the hiring process for anyone working with vulnerable youth. The hidden room discovery also prompted building inspections at similar facilities across the state. Several other institutions were found to have concealed spaces or dangerous structural issues that could have endangered residents. These problems were corrected immediately, potentially saving countless lives. But perhaps the most important change was in how we talk about missing children. The Morales case reminded everyone that victims are not just statistics or case numbers. They are individuals with dreams, fears, and people who love them. Their stories deserve to be told with dignity and respect, not exploited for entertainment or ratings. I established a scholarship fund in their names, providing educational support for children aging out of the foster care system. 7 full scholarships are awarded each year to students who demonstrate resilience in the face of adversity. The recipients often speak about how the Morales children's story inspired them to persevere through their own challenges. The fund has helped over 200 young people attend college, trade school, or other educational programs. Many have gone on to work in social services, law enforcement, or child advocacy. They carry forward the memory of 7 children who never got the chance to pursue their own dreams. Margaret Finley's confession also sparked conversations about truth, guilt, and redemption. Some people felt she had waited too long to come forward, that her deathbed revelation was too little, too late. Others believed her final act of honesty provided closure for families and friends who had wondered for 3 decades. I found myself somewhere in the middle of those perspectives. Margaret's decisions were inexcusable, her years of silence a betrayal of everything she claimed to represent. But her confession, however delayed, finally allowed 7 children to come home. It provided answers to questions that had haunted hundreds of people for 30 years. The construction worker who discovered the hidden room became an unexpected hero in our community. His name was David Chen, a recent college graduate working his first job in his father's renovation company. He could have simply called his supervisor and continued working. Instead, he treated those small remains with the reverence they deserved. David spoke at the memorial service, sharing how the discovery had changed his perspective on life and responsibility. He decided to pursue a career in social work, inspired by his brief encounter with 7 children who had been failed by the adults meant to protect them. He now works with at-risk youth, helping them navigate systems that can be confusing and frightening. The old St. Helena's site has become a place of pilgrimage for people dealing with their own losses. Parents who have lost children, siblings, separated by circumstances, anyone who understands the pain of broken families. They come to sit by the memorial sculpture and remember that love transcends death, that bonds formed in life cannot be destroyed by tragedy. School groups visit regularly to learn about the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Teachers use the Morales story to discuss decision-making, consequences, and the responsibility we all share for protecting vulnerable members of our community. The children listen with wide eyes, understanding that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes that hurt innocent people. I continue to receive letters from people touched by the story. Former orphans share their own experiences with institutional care. Parents express gratitude for reforms that make their children safer. Law enforcement officers describe how the case influenced their approach to missing person investigations. Each letter reminds me that these 7 children continue to make a difference in the world. If you believe one story can change countless lives, type Inspire below. The passage of time has not diminished the impact of their story. If anything, it has grown stronger as new generations discover what happened at St. Helena's Orphanage. Social media has spread their memory to corners of the world they never could have imagined, connecting people who understand the importance of keeping their legacy alive. Documentary filmmakers have approached me about telling their story on screen. I have declined these requests, feeling that the children deserve better than entertainment based on their tragedy. Their story is not a mystery to be solved for audience thrills. It is a reminder of our shared humanity and responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Instead, I have written a book about their lives, not just their deaths. I spent years researching their early childhood, their parents' love, their dreams and personalities. Maria wanted to be a teacher. Carlos loved building things with his hands. Carmen sang lullabies to her younger siblings. Roberto collected rocks and knew the names of every bird in their hometown. Ana drew pictures of the family they missed. Diego was learning to read and write his name. Sophia still sucked her thumb and slept with her stuffed elephant. These details matter because they remind us that 7 unique individuals were lost, not just 7 victims in a tragic case. They had favorite foods, inside jokes, silly arguments, and bedtime rituals. They protected each other, shared secrets, and made plans for their future together. They were children living full lives until those lives were cut tragically short. The book has been used in training programs for social workers, foster parents, and adoption agencies. It helps professionals remember that the children in their care are not problems to be managed or files to be processed. They are human beings deserving of love, respect, and every possible chance at happiness. Margaret Finley's family contacted me several years after her death. Her niece wanted to understand what had driven her aunt to make such devastating choices. We met over coffee, two strangers connected by tragedy, trying to make sense of decisions that seemed impossible to comprehend. The niece shared stories of Margaret's early years at the orphanage, how she had started with genuine hope of helping children. She spoke about personal losses that may have hardened Margaret's heart over time. She wondered if fear, pride, or mental illness had played a role in the tragic choices her aunt made. I listened without judgment, recognizing that understanding Margaret's motivations did not excuse her actions, but might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Sometimes good people make terrible decisions when they feel trapped or overwhelmed. Sometimes the very people meant to protect the vulnerable become their greatest threat. The conversation reminded me that this story has no true villains, only flawed human beings making choices under pressure. Margaret Finley was not evil, just weak and frightened when strength and courage were desperately needed. Her failure cost 7 children their lives, but it also taught the rest of us important lessons about accountability and truth. Today, 31 years after 7 children vanished from St. Helena's Orphanage, their memory continues to inspire positive change. The Memorial Park, where they are remembered, hosts community events, educational programs, and quiet moments of reflection. Their sculpture stands as a permanent reminder that every child deserves protection, love, and the chance to grow up safely. I'm older now, approaching retirement after a career shaped by their story. My hair has gone grey, my steps have slowed, but my commitment to their memory remains strong. I visit their memorial regularly, updating them on the lives they have touched and the changes they have inspired. Sometimes I imagine what they might have become if they had lived. Maria could have been the teacher she dreamed of being. Perhaps, working with children like herself, the twins might have built beautiful things together, their different talents complementing each other. Roberto could have become a scientist, studying the birds and rocks he loved. Anna might have created art that brought joy to the world. Diego could have written books or taught others to read. Sophia might have had children of her own, finally getting the chance to be the big sister she never was. These dreams will never be realized, but the impact of their lives continues to grow. Every child helped by the scholarship fund, every reform inspired by their story, every person who chooses courage over convenience because of their memory represents a living legacy that death cannot destroy. If you believe love never truly dies, type eternal below. The last time I visited St. Helena's Memorial Park, I found fresh flowers by the sculpture and a handwritten note from a young mother. She thanked the Morales children for inspiring her to become a foster parent, to open her home to siblings who needed to stay together. She promised to love them fiercely and protect them always, the way the 7 children had protected each other. That note captured everything I hope their story represents. Not just a tragedy to be mourned, but a call to action that continues reaching across time. 7 children who loved each other enough to face death together still inspire people to love more deeply, protect more fiercely, and choose truth over convenience. Their voices may have been silenced 30 years ago in a hidden room beneath St. Helena's Orphanage, but their message echoes still through the lives they continue to change, the reforms they inspired, and the love they demonstrated even in their darkest moments. Maria, Carlos, Carmen, Roberto, Ana, Diego, and Sofia Morales, 7 names that represent the best of human bonds and the worst of human failures. They remind us that every choice matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and every child deserves a chance to grow up surrounded by love and safety. Their story ends here, but their impact continues forever. In a world that often feels divided and broken, they offer a simple truth. Love is stronger than fear. Truth is more powerful than lies. And even the smallest lives can change everything if we have the courage to listen and learn. The 7 children of St. Helena's Orphanage are finally home, together always, as they always wanted to be. Their legacy lives on in every life they touch, every reform they inspire, and every person who chooses to be better because of their memory. That is the true ending to their story. Not the tragedy of their death, but the triumph of their continuing influence on a world that desperately needs their message of love, truth, and hope.